Invicti Security presents AppSec Serialized, a podcast about web security and those who practice it. Episode 2, Machine Learning When the Perimeter is Burning. It was Bob's first week at MegaHelix Technologies. This was his first time as a Chief Information Security Officer, or CISO, at a decent-sized company. He had been an AppSec guy for a long time, and he had held the title of CISO at his now-defunct startup. But this was different. When you build a house from scratch, you know where all the plumbing is, how the wires run, how to get that leaky faucet to turn off if you turn it just right. But this was a different house, one that had been through many hands, and it was time to do a home inspection. Bob started with the cloud accounts. It was a bit weird for a company of this size to have hosting on both Cerulean and Paraná web services. MegaHelix did mostly B2B, with a lot of partner portals and APIs that lived on the edge and provided connectivity to other cloud-based businesses. Bob whipped up a quick Python script to export the DNS records of all the domains in his new fiefdom. There were a lot more than he expected. He opened his taut IM client and set off a quick message to Alice, the company's lead developer. The phrase, "Alice is typing," hung in the air for several minutes, enough that Bob decided to fire up a quick video call. Alice accepted, camera off.
Hey Alice, just wanted to double check with you on that list of exposed hosts.
Yeah, so those are left over from the old Galactus project. There are like a billion services. After the cuts, I don't think those guys are with the company anymore.
So, can we decommission them?
Probably not. Those things are doing like 1 million API calls a day. And most are probably really important. Nobody knows how they work anymore, though.
The coffee cup came down on the table a bit too hard. A splash of brown marred the pure white of Bob's brand new business card, almost perfectly filling the center of the O in CISO. His hand went to his forehead, and he began rubbing his temples. Bob next checked to see whether the list of publicly available DNS names was firewalled off with security groups and access control lists. Pressed for time, he did a quick sample, and here he found mixed results. Some, typically with host names ending in -partner, were often IP restricted to a particular set of sources. APIs and web apps intended for a private party to access over the internet. But this wasn't always the case. He found an alarming number of hosts with names like dev or test that were open to the internet. On a hunch, he dropped his Corp VPN and pointed his browser at one of the obscure host names. It included a reference to the year 2020 in the host name, a release of partner software that was almost surely out of date. The auto-generated host name was long enough that no one would ever be able to guess it. But Bob had been around long enough to know security through obscurity never worked out, especially when an attacker understood how DNS works. His browser spun for a moment, and Bob felt a moment of hope that the site was no longer accessible. But then it loaded, the login page for what was clearly an out-of-date version of his company's software, sporting the bright coral colors straight out of the last decade's branding. A pop-up banner greeted him with the text, MegaHelix MegaConnect version 20.2, QA system, login with admin and the usual test password. Bob took a deep breath and went to get more coffee. As the steam from the fresh pot drifted towards his nostril, he found himself imagining the systems he was charged with defending, changing from a castle wall with well-defined gates to a sprawling slum spread across a valley with no design or focus. He raised the cup of coffee to his lips and took a long, thoughtful sip. It was going to be a long night. Welcome to another episode of AppSec Serialized, the podcast where we talk about web app and API security. My name is Dan Murphy, and I am the Chief Architect at Invicti Security. With me, as always, is Frank Catucci, our Chief Technical Officer. Today, we have a special guest on the podcast. Bogdan Calin, our Principal Security Researcher, is joining us today to talk about AI and ML. Welcome, Bogdan.
Thank you very much. for inviting me.
In our intro short story, we had a story about a CISO who discovers a field of web apps that he now owns. So Bob, in our story, walked in on day one and realized, wow, my perimeter's a lot bigger than I expected. Frank, have you ever felt anything like that before?
Many times, Dan. So there are a couple scenarios that I can think of right off the bat. The first one was during consulting days, I would often ask, how many web apps or how many APIs do you have? The answer would inevitably be different going around the table for the different stakeholders. I would hear anything from 10 to 100 to 1,000 to we really have no idea. And the discovery process and trying to secure what you don't know exists is really a futile effort, right? Mm-hmm. There's been specific instances, one in particular where I walked into a large news organization. They were using a previous product and they said, hey, look, these are the web apps that we're looking at. These are the APIs. We think this is all that exists. What do you think? Had a very, very similar experience to running a similar type of tool that goes out and does numerous types of discovery methods, DNS-based, not DNS-based, crawling-based, etc. And the amount of web apps that came back, I essentially pushed across the table. I was almost escorted off the property at that point. It was, there's no possible way that these are publicly accessible. When I basically stated that I got this information, off of a guest Wi-Fi or a Wi-Fi hotspot I was actually using. So there was no way I was on a corporate network. I didn't even have corporate credentials. And the fact of the matter was that most of those, not all of them, but there was a good majority of them that were accessible via the outside internet that the company was unaware of. This is real risk, right? This is trying to secure what you don't know is accessible is an extremely difficult task. Mm-hmm. And this is something that all organizations need to be well aware of at any phase of maturity in their AppSec programs.
Yeah, totally. So I think that we probably have some Bobs out there in the audience that have had that feeling before. So we've been building something called Predictive Risk Scoring. And when you have a sea of uncertain hosts, when you discover that you've got a lot of stuff that's perhaps facing the outside world, how can the predictive risk scoring that we've been building, how can that help in that scenario?
So when you have a large volume of surface to attack, if you will, if you have a large volume of web applications and APIs that you may not know that exist, or that you do know that exist, but you need to come up with a strategy for how to attack that problem. Really what we want to do is approach it rather more modern fashion from just saying, hey, here's a million things we need to look at, but we need to know where to start. So we developed this predictive risk to essentially assign a risk rating or a score that allows you to say which of these applications are the biggest things that I should worry about. Where should I look at first? Where should my risk prioritization begin to take a look at those applications and said vulnerabilities? By us allowing the clients or the customer to have a very accurate model that really reports back the risk score of those apps, we can basically stack rank them and tell you where to begin taking a look at the most sensitive ones and the most vulnerable web applications. So even though your list might be 1,000, you're starting with the top 3, 5, 10, whatever it is that have that risk score. So really what it does is it shifts the overall, I would say, mantra of, hey, this needs a patch, fix it, to where does my risk lie? And where should I start? And it really gives us a risk management, risk prioritization, and helps with the confidence of where to begin our AppSec journey or where to focus some of those beginning efforts in securing your AppSec landscape.
So when we do predictive risk, we're going to do a single request to kind of the front page of a site and see how much we can infer about that site. We've got Bogdan with us who did a ton of the interesting work. Bogdan, what parameters does predictive risk scoring use when it does that initial request? How does it determine if a site is risky or not?
So we have a list of 220 parameters in machine learning. They are called features, and these parameters are somehow correlated with the security of a website. So some of them, a few examples are if the website supports deprecated or old TLS versions. Mm-hmm. That will be interesting. Another one is like a copyright. A lot of websites have this copyright. Say copyright 2010 or something like this. Because This is interesting because older websites tend to be more vulnerable. We have stuff like form inputs, like how many forms there are. I mean, logical, because if you have more attack surface, you have more potential for vulnerabilities. Number of XHR requests, like cookies which are not marked as HTTP only, version of different JavaScript libraries could be. How much insecure requests, if the website is using content-side security policy. Mm-hmm. So a lot of stuff like this. So we have in total 220. So a lot of this we are using, we go to make a request to the site, we gather all these features, and then from this we send all the information to a machine learning model, which basically is a gradient boosting decision tree. Mm-hmm. And this model will return a prediction about what it thinks the website is.
Yeah, the metaphor that I often use is it's kind of like having an experienced home inspector who knows how to evaluate a property for structural integrity and, whether or not the roof is good, the foundation is solid, but they're kind of making the assessment from the curb. They're using all of their years of experience to eyeball that house and say, you know what? I can kind of tell that is likely going to have a problem. It's a pretty cool tech, and it's very, very neat stuff. Frank, so this technology of doing risk assessment, of doing that curbside view and evaluating whether or not something is safe or not, is this something that you could see the bad guys, see threat actors using in addition to those who are on the defensive side of things?
Oh, absolutely. So it would be very naive to think that your attackers are not using the available technology like this to formulate a plan of attack or the let's say the juiciest places to look for vulnerable web apps or to exploit for their financial gain. It's also no mistake that a lot of these efforts really originated and derived from enumerating that attack surface and understanding what is coming back to you. This is a frequent and common tactic used for good and bad. Let's say for the good part is, bug bounty programs. If you look at, HackerOne, BugCrowd, etc., there are a lot of similar practices that are used when taking a look at those bug bounty programs, especially the ones that don't limit the web apps and just give you basically a star.domain to go ahead with. And this is an exact technique. Now, on the other side of that coin, if you're an attacker looking for a very similar type of bug or vulnerability, and it happens to be a targeted attack or an attack on, a low-hanging fruit or an attack that's even opportunistic, that is something that the bad guys are going to do regardless of a bug bounty program, regardless of whether they have the rights to do it, etc. So it would be great for us and our customers to be able to do this in the same methodology ahead of time before the attackers get to do it, to understand exactly where that risk lies and give that equal opportunity to the defenders as well. So I would say that it's 100% used on both sides of the coin for good and evil, just as most application security and cybersecurity type of methodology is used.
This technology is not just a ChatGPT wrapper. So there's been a big trend AI is so hot right now, and we have a lot of companies that are kind of just rushing out something that says, hey, we're going to jam a bunch of stuff into ChatGPT and ask what the answer is. So is this a case where we took the DOM and shoved it into the ChatGPT's context window and asked, is it secure? No, it's not. This is not based on large language model. This is a custom model that has been trained, which is pretty cool. So this is more than just kind of your let's jam out something that just asks ChatGPT to summarize something.
Yeah, and there's importance there too, Dan. Right? Let's talk about the privacy implications or the implications of shared data and learning and training data from customers, right? These are not things that they easily want to or may be okay with adopting in a large language model methodology. So this is also important to note that this is something that we are doing that does not go out and just use a public entity like OpenAI, ChatGPT, for instance, where they can use that training data. This is a much more limited, focused, and privacy-aware methodology and approach.
This is a question for kind of both of you guys. So we do see that, hey, we're starting to use AI ML techniques in our own AppSec solution. Do you guys see this as part of a larger picture of a change in AppSec overall, where, taking a look at risk and taking a look at using mechanisms to filter out that sea of noise is becoming much, much more prevalent?
I think we're just starting to scratch the surface of some of the impacts, and I would love your perspective on that, Bogdan.
It is very important for each company to figure out what is the main task which their product achieve. Like, for example, they are assessing security of a risk, something like this. And then they should figure out how can I make it like better or faster, or like how can I improve it with AI? Because I really feel that AI will change a lot of products in the future. I mean, because really, like it can really like bring like big difference. It could like optimize some processes. It could improve others. It could like solve problems which before was not solvable. I mean, it's a lot of stuff. I mean, you can really improve a lot of things with AI. But the idea is that you cannot just push it. I mean, you cannot force it. Like if you don't see like a real problem which you need to solve, and you find a way to improve it with AI, I don't think that makes any sense to really just push it just because you want to have a checkbox or something like this. I mean, you need to solve a real problem.
Yeah, AI is a means to an end. It's not an end in itself in AppSec.
Yeah, I think that's also an important piece to cover. There's a lot of media attention and clicks and things that come along with the AI train. This is something that we've taken a very careful approach with, and being able to provide that real actionable, let's say, value in data behind our approach, and not just waving an AI flag, if you will, but more of a dedication to understanding the value and the real problems that AI can solve. This really comes down to that as an example. The other parts that I think we also need to take a look at is the defensive and offensive side, right? So if we are looking at the capabilities of being able to attack and defend, we know that there's going to be equal opportunity there, and really deriving a solution that takes advantage of the AI's capabilities to deliver that. And doing so in a responsible manner, in a responsible method, with our customers' data and with our data and with our approach to AI ML solutions in our AppSec tooling and programs. Bogdan, did you have anything else to add for maybe use cases?
Attackers are kind of limited because these online models, like for example, when you use the OpenAI API, the APIs are protected against classical attacks. For example, if you ask it to generate like a payload for an SQL injection, or if you ask it to generate a phishing attack or something like this.
Oh yeah, they'll say no. Yeah, they refuse.
This stuff will not work. Yeah, they'll say no. Yeah, because they have this training. But when you will have powerful enough local models, that will change, and then anybody will be able to use this like LLMs locally. And actually recently, like a model it's called Command Air Plus from Cohere, was released, which is even powerful than GPT-4, and it's a local model which was released open source, and anybody can like use it if they have like around 64 gigabytes, if I remember correctly. So with 64 gigabytes, you can use a model which you can run it locally, so you don't have to depend on anybody. And this will be problems. I mean, this will cause a lot of problems because attackers will use this kind of models. And they will not have any restrictions anymore. That stuff, I think, is also... So when the local models are powerful enough, this will give a big advantage for attackers.
Yeah, and I've definitely noticed that just playing around. Like I've got, I have a couple local models, and it's interesting when working in security, the questions that you ask that are filtered, when you have a local model that's running with like 9 billion parameters, it's noticeably less smart. But, I have a local one that is jailbroken, and I also kind of categorize it as, it's like talking to a psychotic toddler. Like, yes, it knows how to do SQL injection and XSS, but it doesn't have enough parameters to do it well yet. And as that starts to change, right, as we get to have more compute, that'll be less a psychotic toddler and more a malevolent teenager, and they can do some damage. So it's going to get interesting.
Yeah, this Command Air Plus from Cohere is 100 billion parameters. So the ones which you have 7 billion.
It's a big difference.
Like
you can tell.
Yeah, it's a huge difference. Yeah. So that's why, I mean, when you have like this powerful model, a lot of stuff are changing because you have a lot of possibilities. I mean, it's just like really like, I mean, I think attackers will use these models. I mean, they didn't use them until now, but I mean, there is no reason why they should not use them in the future. And I think it will be a very big attack surface. Another stuff which I was thinking is interesting is this larger context. When you have like Gemini 1.5 Pro was released actually yesterday for public and has 1 million tokens right now, but they are working on it, and in testing has 10 million tokens. So you can put a lot of stuff in the question.
Bogdan, for those that aren't familiar, when you say context window, what's an example of like where a small context window would prevent you from doing something interesting, and a large context window would allow you to do something more interesting?
Yeah, so for example, if you have a small context window, you can put like a question. Your question you can put, for example, like let's say parts of some code. For example, you put let's say the first file of your project, and you can ask questions about this file. But when you have like a large context, you can put the whole code which you have. For example, you can put, let's say, like a large log file or something, and you can say something like, find vulnerabilities in this code or look for anomalies in this log file. Actually, I just tested because today it was released, this Gemini 1.5 Pro for public. And I uploaded some source code and I asked to look for vulnerabilities, and it managed to find, but it was a test website. But anyway, it was much bigger. You cannot put it in normal context. And it found the vulnerabilities. So this is like interesting for me. And also I uploaded like an access log file from Nginx, and I'd say, can you look for attack patterns in this attack? In this access log, and it managed to find some attacks. And you can ask then refine question and say which is the first attack from this IP, like which are the IPs which generate the most stuff. You can basically ask natural language question on this stuff without having like custom tool for this log. It's just you can do a lot of stuff. And looking for source, like you have a source code, you have, for example, a GitHub repository, and you upload the whole repository, and you ask questions about that stuff, and you say there are some XSS vulnerabilities in this repository or something like this, and it will find some of them, not all of them, but the models are just getting better and better in time.
Right. And the haystack through which we can search for needles has gotten a lot bigger with those bigger context windows.
Conversely, Dan, we just need to make sure that we are developing the technology and the methods that can combat and defend against these using the same type of technology, right? We can't let totally. And that's the key message, and what we're going to try to do in moving forward, and what the industry also needs to do is to utilize this same type of technology for the defenses and the ability to circumvent some of those more automated type of attacks.
Yeah, and just in general, I feel that what the rise in Ryzen LLM tech, not only just for the purposes of generating attacks, but even for the purposes of writing code, has it's really kind of unbalanced the equation a little bit. We've taken a car and we now have the ability to supercharge the engine so it can go really, really fast. But the breaks that we have available to us, the tools of manual code review, the tools of testing, right, checking to see if we have vulnerabilities. Unless we kind of apply the same scaling to those defensive measures, it'll quickly become an unbalanced equation. And I think where we are right now is that we have these supercars that dev shops are going to start cranking out a lot more code than they used to. And, nothing is perfect. LLMs are amazing tech, but they're not magic. And unless we employ similar techniques on the defensive side, we're going to have a fast car that can't brake to take a corner appropriately. That'll just zoom out of control. So it's going to be very, very interesting times in security. But I, for one, I'm super excited for it. It's going to be great.
More lines of code, more bugs, more vulns.
Yeah. One more thing I want to mention is that LLMs, a lot of companies, they start to use LLMs, but the idea is that LLMs, they're like this black box. Nobody understands exactly how they are working. So this is like a big problem. I mean, normally when you are thinking about security, you want to control everything and understand how everything works so you can protect it properly. But these are really huge, insanely huge black boxes, which you don't understand how they are working. And you learn new things about them each day. You learn that if you ask this question or this question is this way, it answer like this. Or that if you ask the same question again and again, it will give you different responses. So for me, this is it's a huge problem that we are able to integrate these black boxes into our software without understanding how they are working internally.
Yeah. And they're non-deterministic. And from a security perspective, that's really interesting. I've seen, I've done kind of examples where you can ask an LLM instructed not to reveal a secret, and you just ask it the same question 10 times, right? Can you tell me the secret? Can you tell me the secret? Can you tell me the secret? Because of that temperature variance, it's designed to not give the same response back. And you may find that through that persistence, you ultimately get the answer, you're able to extract the secret on the 100th time that you've asked the question, for example.
Yeah, so this is like you have software which is 99% of the time secure, but 1% is not secure. I mean, normally you will not deploy something like this, but with LLMs, we are deploying something like this, which I think is kind of interesting.
Excellent. Well, guys, I think that we are at our allotted time, and I just want to say thanks very much, Bogdan. It's always fascinating to talk with you about this stuff, but thank you, Bogdan and Frank.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dan.
And this has been an episode of AppSec Serialized. Special thanks to our featured show guest Bogdan Calin and to Alexa Rogers, who provided the voice of Alice. Zbigniew Banak voiced Bob, wrote and performed our music, and produced the episode. Thanks also to my co-hosts Frank Catucci and both Megan McBee and Kate Bachman. Thanks most of all to you, our listener. I'm Dan Murphy, and this has been another episode of AppSec Serialized.